They forced the black woman to wash dishes. At a glamorous party, not knowing her husband owned. The mansion velvet light spilled from the chandeliers as Naomi Carter crossed the marble threshold of the Carter estate, her gown a river of midnight silk against the white stone. This was her husband's gala, her home's grandest night, yet the first thing she felt was the weight of a stranger's stare. A security guard stepped forward, eyes narrowing, and without a word pushed a silver tray toward her as though she belonged behind the scenes, not at the center of it. Across the foyer, Claudia Wexler's heels clicked like a metronome of disdain. She surveyed Naomi from head to toe, lips pressed into a thin, polite line. "Kitchen staff enters through the side," she murmured, turning away before Naomi could speak. The hum of strings from the ballroom rose and fell behind them, champagne bubbles catching the light like sparks. Guests in couture drifted past, oblivious, while Naomi stood alone beneath the Carter family crest mounted on the wall, a crest that was hers as much as David's. She accepted the tray without protest, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Around her, laughter swelled, crystal clinked, and cameras flashed. No one noticed the small red light glowing on her phone inside the folds of her clutch. Whatever Claudia thought she saw, she was wrong. This was not a mistake Naomi would correct in the foyer. It was a lesson she would deliver later, one the entire room would remember long after the music stopped. Morning light once broke through a cracked apartment window as a teenage Naomi Carter studied with borrowed textbooks spread across a second-hand kitchen table. Her mother's shift at the hospital left little time for sleep, but she made sure Naomi's notebooks were stacked neatly each night. That kitchen smelled of instant coffee and determination. It was there Naomi decided that the world would not decide her worth before she could show it herself. Years later, her name appeared on a crimson Harvard acceptance letter, and the same kitchen filled with tears of relief. Naomi walked the ivy-lined campus carrying not only her laptop, but the weight of her family's sacrifices. Professors admired her precision. Classmates whispered assumptions she had heard all her life about who belonged and who did not. She did not argue. She performed. By graduation, recruiters from major firms lined up to speak with her, yet she chose to build her own company in a small rented office with peeling paint. The firm grew from a handful of laptops into a consultancy praised for its data-driven strategies. Naomi's approach combined empathy with analysis, and clients trusted her judgment more than any glossy brand. Awards followed. So did invitations to panels and interviews, though she accepted few. Each time she stepped into a public event, the same questions returned disguised as curiosity. How did you get here? Who introduced you? As if her credentials were a magic trick rather than earned ground. In that period, she met David Carter. He had inherited land and influence from a lineage of industrialists, but chose to use his inheritance differently. After college, he served with aid organizations abroad, then built a philanthropic foundation that funded schools and tech hubs in underserved communities. Their first conversation happened at a policy conference, not a gala. David listened more than he spoke. He valued results over reputation. When Naomi explained her model for using technology to improve civic systems, his questions were thoughtful rather than patronizing. They married quietly on the coast, no press releases or glossy spreads. David moved between boardrooms and field projects. Naomi expanded her firm. At home, they shared a private sense of mission. The Carter estate was not merely a mansion but a platform. Its high-ceilinged halls had hosted fundraisers for disaster relief, scholarships for first-generation students, and grants for artists shut out of elite galleries. David liked to say that marble and chandeliers meant nothing unless they reflected light outward. Yet Naomi rarely attended the galas herself. She preferred working behind the scenes, building programs, mentoring young entrepreneurs. Too many times she had walked into a ballroom to find staff pressing canapes into her hands or asking for her credentials at the door. Even when David corrected the mistake, the sting remained. Dignity should not depend on introductions. Tonight's charity gala had been designed to fund a new initiative, tech-driven public health clinics in 5 cities. The guest list read like a who's who of power brokers, financiers, senators, cultural icons. Among them were Martin Hale, a real estate magnate whose empire of glass towers dominated several skylines, and Evelyn Cross, a pharmaceutical executive whose polished speeches about access to medicine rarely matched her company's internal policies. Their donations were large enough to merit front-row tables. Their sense of entitlement filled entire rooms. Naomi had agreed to attend after David urged that her presence might inspire the younger invitees, the scholarship students, the small business grantees, who would also be there. She chose a gown understated but elegant, a shade of blue that reminded her of the coast where they had married. On her wrist glimmered a bracelet her mother had saved for years to give her on graduation day. Even before she reached the ballroom, she felt the familiar current of microaggressions brushing against her skin like static. A valet held out a ticket for the service entrance. A guest glanced at her badge and then at her face with faint surprise. Each moment was small enough to be dismissed by others, yet heavy enough to anchor her in place. She breathed slowly, a skill honed in boardrooms where she had been the only black woman at the table. Tonight she would need it again. The Carter estate around her looked like a painting of privilege. Champagne towers trembled under the light of crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played beside an indoor fountain lined with lilies. Photographers angled for shots of celebrities arriving in black cars. Through the double doors, she glimpsed Martin Hale leaning close to Evelyn Cross, their laughter smooth and knowing. Claudia Wexler, the event organizer, moved through the space like a conductor, gesturing staff into position and checking the seating chart on her tablet. Naomi adjusted the clutch in her hand. Inside, her phone's camera app had been activated long before she stepped from the car. A soft red dot glowed, unseen by anyone else. This was not paranoia. It was foresight born of experience. She did not come to the gala looking for confrontation, but she no longer entered elite spaces without a record of how she was treated. She thought of her mother again, telling her as a child to keep her head high even when others tried to press it down. That memory steadied her now. Dignity, her mother said, is not silence. It is control. Naomi intended to keep both. As Claudia's heels approached across the marble floor, Naomi prepared to cross yet another invisible line. She had built companies, advised governments, and mentored leaders who now shaped policy. Yet here she was being mistaken once more for someone hired to serve canapes. Each misstep by the people around her fed a quiet determination already coiled inside her like a spring. Tonight would be different. The stakes were higher than any gala table or donation pledge. Naomi did not only want to protect her own dignity, she wanted to show, in real time, how power shifted when the assumptions of the privileged collided with the truth. And as she walked toward the kitchen carrying a tray she had not asked for, she knew she was not the one stepping into a trap. Steam curled from the industrial sink as Naomi Carter slid her hands beneath the warm water, porcelain plates stacking in silent towers beside her. Around her, the service kitchen buzzed with hurried staff, ferrying trays of canapes and crystal flutes. The smell of roasted herbs and polished silver clung to the air. This was her home's back corridor, yet Claudia Wexler's brisk command had placed her here as though she were a hired hand. "Faster with those, please," Claudia said without looking up from her tablet. Her voice had the clipped precision of someone used to instant obedience. "The guests in the East Parlor will be ready for refills in 5 minutes. Naomi's fingers moved steadily over each plate. Her face revealed nothing. Inside her clutch, tucked on a shelf beside the sink, her phone's camera glowed a faint red, capturing every word, every tone. Through the half-open kitchen door drifted the sounds of conversation from the adjoining hallway. Martin Hale's unmistakable drawl cut through the noise first. "Can you believe this?" he said, a laugh hiding behind his voice. "David Carter throws a gala and still cannot keep his staff in order." "They are everywhere tonight," Evelyn Cross responded with a soft, derisive chuckle. "At least the service is prompt. Though I must say, I expected better uniforms." Her eyes flicked toward Naomi as she entered the kitchen for a glass of water, lingering just long enough to signal the insult. Claudia tilted her head toward them. "Naomi, bring out another tray to Mr. Hale's table," she instructed, then returned to her screen. Naomi lifted the tray without hesitation, stepping into the hallway where Martin and Evelyn stood with their champagne. She placed the refilled glasses on the sideboard, her posture straight, her eyes calm. "Thank you," Martin said with a smirk. "You people work hard for these events." Naomi turned her head slightly. "What people do you mean, Mr. Hale?" Her voice was gentle but precise, a line drawn so thin they almost missed it. Martin blinked. "Service staff, of course," he said quickly. "Nothing wrong with honest work." "Honest work deserves honest respect," Naomi replied, setting the last glass down. Her gaze held his for a fraction of a second before she stepped back into the kitchen. Evelyn watched her leave and whispered, "Bold for help, is she not?" Both laughed softly, unaware of the phone recording the exchange from Naomi's clutch on the counter. Inside the kitchen, Naomi wiped her hands and glanced at her phone screen under the cloth. Waveform lines moved across it, capturing their voices with crystalline clarity. A message notification pulsed at the top. "David, are you all right?" She typed with one thumb under the counter. "Everything under control." Trust me, another dish slid into the drying rack. In her mind, she replayed each microaggression like beads on a string. She did not need to shout. She did not need to storm into the ballroom. Every insult tonight was already building a case stronger than any speech. A young caterer brushed past her carrying a tray of desserts, eyes wide with apology. "I am so sorry they have you doing this," he murmured under his breath. Naomi gave him a calm glance. "Do your work well," she said softly. "It will matter later." Across the room, Claudia was speaking on her earpiece, instructing staff to prepare the next course. She glanced at Naomi once, expression unreadable. To Claudia, this was an efficient evening. To Naomi, it was a stage being set piece by piece. From the hallway came another burst of laughter. Martin's voice again. "I heard she tried to start her own firm once. Did not last long, I imagine. Not in this market." Evelyn's reply floated in, sharper now. "Ambition can be charming until it forgets its place." Some people do not understand that these events are for the real decision-makers. Naomi dried her hands slowly. Her heartbeat was steady, not from indifference but from focus. Years of boardrooms had taught her that silence can be more powerful than rebuttal. She opened her clutch, just enough to check the timestamp. 30 minutes of recording so far. More than enough to show intent, tone, and repetition. Another vibration from her phone. "David, I am coming down in a few minutes. Stay where you are." She typed back without lifting her eyes. No need. Let it unfold. Then she straightened, smoothing the front of her gown that now bore faint water spots from the sink. She could feel Martin and Evelyn's glances, even from behind the door. The same glances she had endured on campuses, in conferences, in boardrooms. Tonight, though, those glances would no longer slip into the void. She walked to the doorway and paused, just enough for the two elites to notice her presence again. Her voice, when it came, was low and deliberate. "Enjoy your evening. It may be more memorable than you expect." Martin raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" Naomi's lips curved into a faint smile. She returned to the sink without another word, leaving them with the echo of her tone. Back at the counter, she adjusted the phone so its microphone faced the hall. Claudia continued issuing orders, unaware of the net closing around her distinguished guests. David's next message appeared. Almost there. Naomi locked the screen and slipped the phone deeper into her clutch. The recording would keep running. She picked up a fresh tray and held it for a moment, feeling its weight. Around her, the kitchen noise blurred, replaced by the steady rhythm of her own breathing. When she looked up again, the expression on her face had shifted. Gone was the mask of passive service. In its place was the quiet focus of someone moving a piece on a chessboard. Her eyes found the reflection of Martin and Evelyn in the polished metal of the warming station. They believed they were watching a woman forced into silence. They believed tonight belonged to them. Naomi smiled, but it was not the smile they thought. Steam curled above the industrial sinks as the kitchen staff hustled between trays of hors d'oeuvres and stacks of crystal glasses. The noise of the gala outside floated in like an alien world. String music, polite laughter, and the muted clinking of cutlery, while the kitchen pulsed with orders barked in clipped tones. Naomi stood at the sink, her hands moving in slow, deliberate circles over a silver platter. Her gown's satin cuffs were rolled high, water beading along the fabric like tiny pearls. Claudia Wexler swept in again, her clipboard held like a scepter. She did not even glance at Naomi's face. "Another set of glasses needs polishing." And wiped the counters. Guests can see smudges from the hallway. Naomi reached for the towel without a word. Inside, something began to tighten. The night's heat, the sting of soap on her skin, and Claudia's icy voice blended into a pressure she had felt before. Pressure she had always turned into fuel. Across the room, Martin Hale leaned against a doorway, a glass of wine balanced carelessly in his hand. He had followed Claudia to the kitchen, curious about the woman in the designer gown doing menial work. Evelyn Cross trailed him, whispering behind a manicured hand. "She looks out of place even back here," Martin muttered loud enough for Naomi to hear. "Some people will do anything for a free dinner." Evelyn giggled. "At least she has a nice dress. Shame she will ruin it with soap." Naomi dried her hands and turned slightly, her profile calm, eyes steady. "This dress is not so fragile," she said softly. "It was made to last." Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the kitchen noise. For a heartbeat, Martin blinked, then smirked as if unsure whether she had spoken back at all. Claudia clapped once. "Less talking, more work. The guests are paying for an experience." Naomi resumed polishing the glasses. Her phone rested on the counter near the sink, screen dark, microphone already recording. She glanced at it once, then at the swinging door that led to the ballroom. Each sound, their insults, Claudia's commands, slipped silently into digital memory. Outside, David Carter moved between clusters of donors. He smiled politely, shook hands, but his mind was on his phone. Naomi's brief text, "In kitchen," recording everything, had sharpened his focus. He excused himself from a conversation with a senator and typed back, 5 minutes. "Make sure you are ready." He had already called 2 board members of the foundation. Both owed him favors. If this evening went as Naomi suspected, he would need witnesses on his side. Back in the kitchen, Claudia shoved another tray toward Naomi. "Serve these to table 6. And stay quiet. Do not disturb the mood." Naomi took the tray, its weight pressing into her palms. She lifted her chin slightly, the way she had learned to do when walking into courtrooms full of doubters. Step by step, she carried the hors d'oeuvres out to the ballroom. Martin watched her go with a crooked grin, whispering to Evelyn. When Naomi returned, Claudia pointed to a mop by the refrigerator. "There's a spill. Clean it. Quickly." Naomi stared at the mop for a long moment. Her pulse slowed instead of rising. The small crack that had formed in her composure sealed itself. She slid the phone into a hidden pocket of her gown and moved toward the spill. Every gesture now was deliberate, practiced, like a chess player advancing a piece toward checkmate. At the far end of the kitchen, one of the younger servers whispered to another. "She is too calm," he said. "You see how she looks at them?" The other server nodded. "She is not like the rest of us." Something is happening. Naomi knelt to wipe the spill, but her eyes lifted toward the doorway. Through the small glass pane, she could see the chandelier light glinting on David's hair as he excused himself from the crowd. He was moving this way, his stride purposeful. Martin's voice cut through again. "Do you think she even knows whose house this is?" Evelyn laughed too loudly. "Maybe she thinks she can network back here." Naomi rose slowly, the mop in her hand like a staff. She set it aside and smoothed her gown. For a split second, her eyes met Claudia's, and something flickered, an almost imperceptible warning. David stepped into the kitchen just then. His presence changed the air. He was still in his tuxedo, still smiling politely, but his eyes swept the room like a searchlight. Behind him, a photographer from one of the society magazines lingered, camera at the ready. Naomi exhaled once, steady and silent. The night's tension had reached its crest. Every insult, every command, every whisper hung in the air like static before a storm. She adjusted the folds of her gown, the hidden phone heavy against her hip. David's eyes found hers. They exchanged no words, but the open loop of their plan tightened like a knot. The kitchen door swung shut behind David, sealing them in with the noise of clattering plates and muffled laughter from the ballroom. Naomi straightened, a faint, unreadable smile touching her lips. Claudia opened her mouth to issue another order but stopped when she saw the way David was looking at his wife. In the hush that followed, Naomi's heart beat once, twice, like a drum announcing something no one else yet understood. The stage was set. The power that had been hidden under satin sleeves and soapy water was about to step into the light. The kitchen door banged open with a sound that cut through steam and clattering pans. Conversation stopped. David Carter strode in, black tuxedo immaculate, bow tie slightly loosened from the pace at which he had walked. His eyes found Naomi at the sink. "Naomi," he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. "What is going on here?" Every head turned. Claudia froze, clipboard halfway to her chest. Martin set his glass down with a soft clink, while Evelyn's painted lips parted, but no words came. The name hung in the air like a bell. Naomi, not staff, not help, but Naomi. Naomi straightened slowly. Water dripped from her hands onto the tile. Without a word, she reached into the hidden pocket of her gown and pulled out her phone. The screen glowed faintly. She held it up so everyone could see the red recording dot. "I have been working," she said evenly, "but not the way you thought." For a heartbeat, no one moved. The kitchen staff stared, eyes flicking between the tall man in the tuxedo and the woman they had watched polish silver. David took another step forward. "She is not staff," he said. "She is my wife. She is Naomi Carter, the founder and CEO of Carter Tech Solutions. This house belongs to both of us." Claudia blinked hard, as if trying to reboot. I was told—" "You were told nothing," David cut in. "You assumed, and you humiliated her." Naomi lowered the phone slightly but kept it visible. "I recorded everything, every order, every insult, every laugh." Her voice stayed calm, but her words landed like hammer strikes. Martin's smirk flickered and died. "This is ridiculous. You cannot—" David raised a hand and spoke over him. "Martin Hale, your development contract with our foundation is terminated effective immediately. Evelyn Cross, your boutique's sponsorship for next quarter is revoked. Claudia Wexler, your event company will no longer receive a single dollar from the Carter family or our partners." The clipboard slipped from Claudia's fingers and clattered to the floor. Evelyn swayed slightly, gripping the counter for support. Martin's jaw tightened as if he might argue, but the sight of Naomi's glowing phone and David's steady gaze stopped him. Outside, music from the ballroom floated in, cheerful and oblivious. But inside the kitchen, a different kind of silence grew, one filled with the weight of reversal. A young server whispered, "She is his wife." Another added, "She was recording." The words spread like ripples. Naomi wiped her damp palms on a towel and then, with slow precision, untied the plain apron she had been given at the start of the evening. She folded it once and laid it on the counter. The gesture was small but final, like closing a door. Claudia tried again. "Mrs. Carter, please, if we can just explain—" Naomi looked at her, eyes calm, almost kind. "You had hours to see me as a guest. You chose to see me as something else. The explanation is yours to give to the public." David took out his phone and tapped a command. "The recordings are already backed up," he said. "In a few minutes, our media team will distribute them to outlets. I suggest you prepare your statements." Martin's face drained of color. "This will ruin us," he muttered. Naomi tilted her head. "Actions have consequences. Maybe now you will think about the way you treat people who cannot answer back." Evelyn's voice cracked. "You cannot do this overnight. We have contracts." "They have been cancelled," David said. "Every clause allows for termination based on conduct damaging to the foundation's values. I assure you, your behavior tonight qualifies." In the far corner, one of the dishwashers stifled a smile. Another crossed himself as if he had just seen a miracle. The power dynamic that had ruled this room minutes ago had flipped so completely, it felt like gravity itself had shifted. Naomi picked up her clutch from the counter. The phone still glowed in her other hand. She looked at David and gave a small nod. Without needing to speak, they shared an understanding. The plan they had built quietly over years of facing prejudice had worked again. She turned back to Claudia, Martin, and Evelyn. "Tonight was supposed to be about charity," she said. "Remember that word." Then, in one smooth movement, she slid the phone into her clutch, straightened her shoulders, and walked toward the door. The kitchen staff parted for her as if for royalty. At the threshold, she paused. Behind her, Claudia bent to pick up the clipboard with trembling hands. Martin and Evelyn stood like statues, their glamorous faces pale under the fluorescent lights. Naomi reached up and unclipped the last tie of the apron, letting it slip from her fingers to the tile. It fell soundlessly, a strip of fabric marking the end of their assumptions. She stepped into the hallway, back into the glow of chandeliers, and music, the scene of humiliation transformed into a stage for dignity. Cameras from the society photographer caught her at that moment, the woman who had been forced into the kitchen, walking out as the owner, as the leader, as herself. And for the people left behind in the kitchen, the image would linger. Naomi. Carter leaving them stunned, her quiet revenge already moving beyond them towards something far larger. By dawn the next morning, the story had already broken. Headlines rolled across phones and tablets like a rising tide. Carter Gala scandal exposes class bias at luxury event. CEO humiliated, strikes back with viral recording. Claudia Wexler's firm loses all Carter contracts overnight. News anchors replayed the same short clip of Naomi lifting her phone in the kitchen, David standing behind her like a wall of quiet force. Within 48 hours, Claudia Wexler's event company was shuttered. Martin Hale issued a rambling statement about misunderstanding, but still lost his flagship project with the Carter Foundation. Evelyn Cross closed her boutique for renovations after sponsors pulled out. The glittering trio, who had sneered at Naomi, were now the ones answering questions under harsh fluorescent lights. Naomi watched the coverage from her office window, the skyline still pink with early light. She did not smile. Instead, she took a slow breath, remembering the sound of dishes clattering, the weight of the tray pressed into her hands. Revenge had been swift, but she had always intended something beyond punishment. She opened a folder on her desk, labeled Carter Initiative. Inside were plans she and David had drafted over months. Training programs for service workers who wanted to become managers, seed funding for Black and minority entrepreneurs shut out of traditional capital, a scholarship pipeline linking hospitality staff to business schools. The recordings from the gala would become the public launch, proof of why such an initiative mattered. A soft knock at her door broke her thoughts. Maria, one of the youngest kitchen workers from that night, stepped in holding a letter. Her hands trembled. "Mrs. Carter, I just wanted to say thank you. Seeing you stand up in there." Her eyes shimmered. Naomi rose and handed her a different envelope. "This is an acceptance letter," she said gently. "Full tuition and training at our hospitality leadership program. You said you wanted to study business. Now you will." Maria covered her mouth, tears spilling. "I do not know how to thank you." "Do not thank me," Naomi said. "Just promise to do for someone else what you wished someone would do for you." When the young woman left, clutching the envelope, David stepped into the office. He loosened his tie and leaned against the doorframe. "Claudia just sent another apology," he said. "She is begging for a private meeting." Naomi closed the folder. "We are not meeting her," she replied. "The contracts are gone, but the cameras will move on soon. We have to show what comes next." David crossed the room and took her hands. "We already are," he said. "You turned a humiliation into a movement. That is what people will remember." She looked up at him, tired but steady. "I do not want to be remembered for a takedown. I want to be remembered for building something better." Through the glass behind them, the city began to brighten, towers catching the first full sunlight. Naomi imagined the kitchen staff waking to new headlines, service workers scrolling through articles that, for once, held up their dignity instead of erasing it. She could almost feel the shift, like a tide changing direction. David squeezed her hands. "You know, the foundation board will fight you on some of these proposals." "They can fight," Naomi said. "We will still build. The best revenge is not just proving them wrong. It is making sure no one else has to go through what happened to me." She turned back to the window, her reflection layered over the skyline. The viral clip was only a spark. The real fire would be the programs launching next week, the scholarships already approved, the mentorship network going live. The plan she had hinted at in the kitchen was no longer silent. It was unfolding. Down in the lobby, a delivery of new brochures arrived, their cover showing a photograph of hands joined across a table. The Carter Initiative, Dignity at Work. Naomi's signature glimmered at the bottom. She rested her forehead lightly against David's chest for a moment. They were not celebrating. They were not gloating. They were planning, turning one night's humiliation into a blueprint for systemic change. And somewhere beyond the glass and headlines, people who had never heard her name before were already applying for the first round of grants. The crimson banners of Harvard rippled in a light spring breeze as Naomi Carter stepped up to the lectern. Rows of graduates in caps and gowns filled the courtyard. Cameras from national networks framed her face. The viral clip from the Carter Gala had become a touchstone for conversations about dignity, class, and race. Now, months later, she was not here as a guest speaker only. She was here as a living case study of turning humiliation into leadership. She placed her notes on the podium, but did not look down at them. "There are moments," she began, "when people try to reduce you to something smaller. The true test of power is not how loudly you can answer, but how deeply you can build." Her voice carried across the courtyard, steady and clear. Screens behind her flashed images of the Carter Initiative training programs already underway. In the crowd, students held up phones showing a new trend, Naomi Challenge, videos of people stepping in to defend a co-worker, giving scholarships, or simply treating service staff with respect. What had begun as a scandal had become a quiet movement of dignity in action. That morning, Naomi had opened a letter from Claudia Wexler. It was handwritten, the ink slightly smudged. Claudia wrote of sleepless nights, lost contracts, and lessons learned. She asked for forgiveness. Naomi's reply had been one elegant sentence, now trending on social media. "True power is not in destroying your enemies, but in removing the need for them." She looked over the graduates and smiled, not the smile of that night in the kitchen, but one of calm certainty. "The best revenge," she said, pausing so the words settled, "is building a better world." Applause rose like a wave. She closed with a challenge. "Wherever you go next, into boardrooms, classrooms, kitchens, or labs, take dignity with you. Make it contagious." As the crowd stood, camera crews zoomed in. The Carter Initiative logo filled the screen with a simple line beneath it. "Join us." And for viewers watching at home, the narrator's voiceover faded in. Subscribe to follow Naomi Carter's journey and share this story if you believe dignity should be everyone's starting point. Fade out on the Harvard seal, the sound of applause echoing.